Good afternoon to those of you who have joined the session for the Institute of Economic Development on Levelling Up. I'm just watching the numbers tick up in terms of participants. So once the flurry has stopped, we'll start more formally. Great. Well, people will, of course, join as we're going along, but I think probably we've got more than enough to start now. We're safely over 150 people on the call. So welcome to the Institute of Economic Development's afternoon discussion on the Levelling Up white paper. And we've got in front of us an interesting afternoon of both comments from participants and then the opportunity for questions. What we're going to do is spend the next 45 minutes or so taking expert witness views on the white paper and then open out to questions, which will be through the Q&A function. So please don't wait to the end of the speakers to launch your questions. For those of you who don't know the Institute of Economic Development, we're a membership organisation that looks after the professionals involved in economic development, of course. And for those of you who aren't members, then please do consider having a look at our website and getting more involved. We're always keen to see both individuals and organisations getting involved, and you'd be very welcome. So please do have a look at that. But what we're going to do in terms of running order is start with Mairi Spowage. So Mairi is a director at the Fraser of Allander Institute and the Economics Department of Strathclyde University, and has got a background in Scottish government, was the Deputy Chief Exec of the Scottish Fiscal Commission. And so we were keen to hear her perspectives on the requirements for levelling up and levelling up more generally. So very pleased to be joined now by Mairi. So over to you, Mairi.
Thanks, Nigel, and thanks for inviting me along today. Those of you who are on the call who are maybe familiar with our work that we do at the Institute, we do a lot of economic research into economic policy. We focus quite a lot on Scotland, but more and more we're doing stuff right across the UK on regional inequalities, regional economies, and you know, in the areas of trade, of poverty, and all sorts of different things. We've published a few papers over the last year on levelling up and focusing on different things, and we're continuing to do research with local authorities, with local enterprise partnerships, with regional development agencies where they still exist, to explore the impact that the levelling up agenda and the focus on it is having on economic development policy. So I'm really excited to speak to you guys today. So Nigel asked me to cover a little bit of the motivation, obviously, for something like the levelling up agenda. Obviously, you will all know, given the roles that you have, that we have significant regional inequalities across the UK. When we look at outcomes in terms of things like economic growth, GDP per head, productivity, we can see huge differences. And even if you exclude the outlier that is London, we've got lots of areas that are maybe twice as productive in terms of economic output as other areas of the country. But it's not just in economic outcomes that we see these differences, it's in life expectancy, educational outcomes, experience of crime, all of these different aspects of our lives. We see huge inequalities across the UK. And in terms of what's happened in recent years, all we've seen is these gaps increase. And that was even before the pandemic. And we know that a lot of inequalities that we have across the UK have been exacerbated by the experience of COVID and the associated lockdowns and furlough and so on. So The sorts of things that have maybe been done to try and reduce inequality don't seem to have been working, but that's perhaps because of the inequalities of inputs as well. We know that what we spend and invest across the UK, so for example, London compared to the other parts of England, has also not been equal. So perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that we're not seeing those inequalities close across the UK. So I know many of you on the call will work in economic development in local enterprise partnerships and local authorities. And you've been working for many years in an attempt to regenerate left behind areas. That's what a lot of economic development is all about. And as ever in policy making, it can feel like new policy slogans come along to describe what you're already doing or what you've been doing for many years. So whether it's something like levelling up or something like community wealth building, these are terms which describe activity which isn't necessarily new, just newly badged. The white paper that was published recently on levelling up illustrates some of the issues with the collection of policies that are badged under this policy agenda. I have to say, with someone who's focused a lot on devolved government and devolved competence and the responsibilities of the devolved nations, the coverage of the UK is patchy, and in a devolved context, it feels somewhat of an afterthought. So the recognition that many of the areas that are talked about in the Levelling Up white paper, that many of these areas fall within devolved competence is a little perfunctory. And so addressing this perception must be a key part of one of the stated aims of this agenda, which is to empower local leaders. And like it or not, we have to accept the fact that this builds on the reaction to the last few years, particularly around things like the Internal Markets Bill. And so ambitions for working with devolved governments may need to be prepared with a different way of distributing the funds than has happened to date, with a lot of it focused directly on funding local authorities. Many of the success measures that are outlined in the white paper at the moment are focused on England only or don't cover the whole of the UK, which raises quite interesting questions about understanding the success of levelling up across the UK as a whole. What we kind of measure here matters in terms of understanding the success of this as a new way of trying to reduce inequalities across the UK. When we've been speaking to local authorities and local enterprise partnerships across the UK about the money that's been distributed so far as part of the Levelling Up agenda, there are a number of concerns. Although obviously investment has been welcomed, it's important that the government engages with the concerns to ensure that the investments achieve the outcomes that are desired from these interventions. The first one and the main one that I've heard is around capacity in local authorities to engage with the challenge style funds that have so far been a feature of levelling up across the UK. The capacity to engage in these is uneven across different local authorities. And at that level, it's unlikely to lead to investments that are regionally strategic or not necessarily. And I think that it would be fair to say that that has been a feature of some of the things that have been funded to date through the Levelling Up Fund, for example. The positive progress that we've heard from a number of different, particularly regional actors, for strategic investments to things like city and regional deals, creation of combined authorities or mayoral combined authorities, should not be undermined by competition between local authorities within areas. So it's important not to lose that kind of regionally strategic focus that has come through a lot of these positive interventions over recent years. And also, it's really important that there's a lot of investment in appraisal and evaluation of the different policies that are funded through this scheme to ensure that we really understand what works. And that's a big feature in the Levelling Up white paper. So it's good to see that, but that needs to be backed up with investment in evaluation and appraisal capacity so that we do understand what actually works through these different interventions that are being done through the Levelling Up Fund. So that's what I wanted to say to start off the discussion, Nigel. So I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Mairi. That's great. Much appreciated, and really good to hear a perspective of somebody that's worked through some of the issues associated with devolution, whether that's at, in this case, a national level, or as we'll no doubt get onto today, thinking about things at a regional level. And as you were speaking, I was suddenly struck that, you know, I think the Institute's been a major proponent of devolution and more local determination. But at the same time, I suppose that achievement of consistency and everybody understanding policy in different regions has been beneficial. And can we achieve one without losing the other? Would be certainly a question that maybe I'll put into the Q&A function. So we've got one question in the Q&A function. Don't pause in putting these in as you hear our speakers. We will get to them as we open up for questions. And our next speaker is Mark Bretton. Very pleased to be joined by Mark. He's the chair of the LEP Network in England, but he holds that role partly because he's also the chair of the Hertfordshire LEP. And Mark currently has a professional advisory role in his day job after a senior career with Accenture. So we're very pleased to welcome Mark and look forward to hearing what your perspectives are.
Thank you very much indeed. Just checking you can hear me okay, yeah? Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you to the IED for inviting me to join you today. Thanks also to Mairi and to Greg, and I should say that the LEP community, Greg, will always be indebted to you for your huge support when you were in Cabinet and your sage advice since. From my introduction, yes, I chair the LEP network that brings together all 38 LEPs in England. We don't operate in the devolved nations, but we obviously share ideas, best practice and ambitions. Yeah, over the last 10 years, we've had over 20 billion in capital funds allocated to us from the UK and Europe, but we've more than matched that with private sector investment that we've leveraged and delivered some great outcomes. And that's the foundation for why we are now an integral part of the white paper, and we are now about to begin a new chapter. There is so much going on in the world that is going to require huge dedication, resolve and resilience, and it's only become tougher with what the last 2 years have thrown at all of us. And I think, you know, we can't have an event like this. We're just noting what's going on over in Ukraine, that after the ravages of COVID, they're now facing so much in terms of horrendous challenges. And of course, our thoughts are very much with their people. But back here, we clearly still have a very different but long journey to travel, and we can and must get through this. For the past 2 years, my fellow LEP leaders have demonstrated their own dedication and resolve, particularly over the last 11 months of yet another LEP review, when they've more intensely made the case for a future role for LEPs and the value we bring, often against a good deal of negative briefing in some of the media. Of course, it's been a tough time for our highly dedicated staff, given the uncertainties the LEP review has brought. We must be the most scrutinised and reviewed local economic body in the country. But the outcome of the Levelling Up white paper is testament to this degree of resolve and determination, ensuring that the local business voice continues to have a vital say in local economic decision making. The affirmation from government in the white paper of, and I quote, "the vital role LEPs have and will continue to play in future" is helpful, but we still have much more work to do to put flesh on the bones, not least securing funding. The white paper also marks the first time in our history that LEPs are embedded in major core policy, not just our own policy, but core policy, with strong support from ministers and a clear recognition of the impact we've made in the past 10 years and our future value. So we've been busy building collateral and strengthening our reputation to make sure our story is heard and respected, evidenced by the fact our relationship with the business representative organisations and our other stakeholders has never been better. But much more needs to be done. And I do want to put, before I look at the white paper, on record my thanks to all my colleagues in the LEP and my network team for their consummate professionalism during this time, which has finally persuaded government to reach a positive conclusion. And now we need to capitalise on it. And I'd like to thank the ID for your support and recognising the importance of bringing everyone together at this and local level. So let's take a look at the white paper. So in response to the title question of today's event, although LEPs are apolitical, I'd probably veer on the side of serious policy ideas. And as testament to that was a striking comment from the journalist and academic Will Hutton, who noted, the first 2/3 of this document is amongst the best government analyses of Britain's economic and social failings I have read. But the challenge in resolving that is just as stark, as he also points out. If the foundational framework it outlines is followed through, it could deliver, as the paper says, a generational £2.5 trillion increase in national output over and above whatever growth Britain might otherwise have expected. It's a fabulous national prize. So what's the role for LEPs in all of this, and how do we help the country to achieve such Olympian ambitions? The standouts for us in the white paper are these. Firstly, that government clearly acknowledges a future role for us. Secondly, it sees a future value for us in that levelling up vision. And thirdly, it recognises the power of our unique convening partnership. And more specifically, it recognises the key elements of what makes that possible for LEPs. Namely, that LEPs have acted as important organisational means, bringing together businesses and local leaders to drive economic growth across England. That LEPs play an important role in bringing together stakeholders from local authorities and businesses. And that the UK government recognises the convening power of these groups and is committed to working with stakeholders to strengthen and deepen partnership working to drive local growth. And it finally nails home with its conclusion on LEPs. And again, I quote from the white paper. It's important to retain the key strengths of these local business-oriented institutions in supporting private sector partnerships and economic clusters, while at the same time better integrating their services and business voice into the UK government's new devolution plans. Now, as always, the devil's in the detail, but the course is set for greater and deeper devolution. The task for us is to ensure that busy business people believe they have enough purpose to keep them engaged. And this is what's made LEP so valuable to date, and it's an asset that cannot be overstated. Over 2,000 local business folk offering their time and expertise to support their local economies, like most of us, pro bono. But put simply, it's no longer about the amount of capital pots allocated, and you've seen the numbers, but the ability to influence how these capital pots are spent. We now need to put all of this in the context of the 12 missions and their supporting pillars, building on the compelling case we've succeeded in making for our role as catalyst to deliver the plan for growth and net zero. And as highlighted by the IED, government often likes to reinvent local economic architecture, and the value of learning and partnerships is often lost to the appetite for glossy year announcements, as every 10 years a little itch gets scratched. But that's not the case with this white paper. Although we've yet to see how and to what extent LEPs will become part of the local economic planning landscape in mayoral combined authorities and county deal areas, rest assured, we will be at the table. But the pathway to levelling up gold is not straightforward. It reflects the differing variations of local circumstances, and it's clear from the outset there is by no means any single model that will fit all scenarios. The journey to devolution for many could be a lengthy one. The white paper suggests this is a decade-long ambition. Some suggest even longer. And in some areas, there may be no greater appetite for mayors or county deals than what we currently see. So our immediate task is to ensure we have effective systems in place now that will manage the interim transition period, ensure that any integration where it happens is as smooth as possible, and that where there is none planned, the role and value of LEPs is underpinned and, most importantly, properly funded. For us, the key takeaway in structural terms is summed up in one line, that the UK government is encouraging the integration of LEPs and their business boards into MCAs, the GLA and county deals where these exist. And again, the extent and timing of this integration is a movable feast, with some LEPs much further along the road than others. Different routes will be dependent on status of devolution negotiations in different areas, but we will end up with some significantly variable geometry as well as timelines. But one thing is certain for the immediate term at least, the vast majority of LEPs will not be in MCA areas. So for us, and mine included, the bigger and more urgent question has to be identifying the role and funding for those LEPs. Our primary focus here then is the importance of the local business voice and how that transposes into an integrated model, interim planning, and local devolution discussions themselves, which is a discussion we're having with officials right now. The trick is how we set up the new landscape to ensure that the local business voice has a say on how it is ultimately shaped. Involving that voice in the devolution agreement will help keep those 2,000 business people around the table. LEPs has shown we're able to operate effectively within all existing structures, but central to each is a clear, distinctive, and influential voice of the private sector. So what do LEPs bring to the table? In strategic policy terms, there is a regional plan for growth that LEPs have helped shape. We see part of our role around contributing towards these plans further and helping to execute them locally. In areas without a combined authority or MCA, there should be some strategic economic planning going on, and that needs to be done at the LEP level if we believe in functional economic areas, and the white paper continues to talk about their importance. Issues like HS2 require a strategic plan at a functional economic level. And for us, it's that SEP, that strategic economic plan and vision that partners sign up to that matters much more than building specific roundabouts or dual carriageways. Such strategic planning remains a strong natural fit for LEPs as we move from SEPs and local industrial strategies to COVID recovery, post-EU and beyond. That local business experience and strategic expertise are essential if we are to deliver evidence-based interventions in support of the governing's levelling up ambitions. From our work on skills to business support, evidence-based decision-making is at the forefront of our local success, with longer-term solutions rather than immediate headlines being the key driver. LEPs are very well positioned and have strong capability to do much of the heavy lifting to move the dial on levelling up. We offer a vast amount of local business leadership in core areas of the white paper, and I'll take you through some now. Let's look at sector leadership. We see significant roles for LEPs in key sectors. We see ourselves driving that on behalf of the region and in the context of a regional plan, but also working across LEP boundaries to ensure best practice and help navigate complex national sector geography. Developing sector leadership across geographical areas, LEPs are home to and work closely with world-leading sector champions. From creative industries, cyber and net zero through to space and defence, LEPs are already bringing critical clusters together right across the country to support innovation, work with the catalysts and catapults, and turbocharge their growth. We're also working to underpin the government's R&D objectives. These mesh and integrate with our sector specialists. We ran a recent series of innovation roundtables with ministers of business, energy, and science focused on green economic recovery, which demonstrated how LEP's convening capability can really make things happen, pulling in businesses that integrate with each other to help push innovation goals and overcome barriers. Key future value for LEPs is based on a what works approach, in-place R&D investments, from identifying local strengths, needs and opportunities to ensuring decision makers, both local and national, have the information and support that underpin R&D decision making. Clusters again highlighted in the white paper are a significant driver to enabling. LEPs have demonstrated the benefits clearly, whether it's cell and gene therapy, agri-tech, automation, robotics, or biotech. Some of the biggest standout examples are driven by LEPs. We're working very closely with DCMS to level up digital skills in some of the most challenging areas through our local digital skills partnerships, DSPs. In fact, the government recently highlighted the work of Hull and East Yorkshire LEP's local DSP, recognising it as a best practice exemplar and one of the templates for developing the partnerships more widely. And interestingly, we're now working with the Japanese government, discussing how learning might be shared between our countries. Again, our future work connects directly to the ambitions of the white paper, tackling the spatial disparities of the digital skills gap, where areas with higher age demographics can be significantly less digitally proficient. LEPs have significant success in skills, particularly through our skills advisory panels, SAPs. As the white paper makes clear, good granular data is critical to enable the skills system to respond positively to emerging skills needs and provide valuable skill provision. Business feeds directly into this SAP data and relies on the cross-cooperation and capacity of LEPs to gather and deliver this level of information at scale. No other organisation is doing this locally, and it connects directly with the aims of your proposed unit for future skills. LEP's also co-founded the Career and Enterprise Companies Enterprise Advisor Network, which has brought nearly 3,000 business volunteers into schools to support and stimulate vital career choices for students. It also informs really relevant curricula for apprenticeships. It's our convening role that has boosted the benefits, scale and reach of this CEC partnership and enabled more business stakeholders to connect directly with their local schools. LEPs are working in cross-partnership to deliver solid results with their skills bootcamps and institutes of technology, addressing skills needs needed in green technology, the HGV and logistics sector, digital, advanced manufacturing, and the construction sector, just to name a few. And again, delivering another white paper ambition to resolve actual national and local skills shortages. From a place perspective, LEPs have unrivaled business understanding of their local areas and a forensic evidence base to underpin this. We are best placed in business terms to be able to identify and translate levelling up ambition into real economic benefit. And at a granular level, that means an unrivaled assessment of future skills needs, identifying potential growth areas, exploiting local economic strengths, delivering local low carbon plans to meet net zero targets, supporting local businesses to grow and identify new markets. So in conclusion, if I can borrow Jonathan Van Tam's regular analogy, we're in the penalty area now. We just need to get the ball finally over the line. But this is, of course, great progress from where we were just 2 years ago, trying to defend our end of the pitch and protect our goal for so long. This is a tribute to the hard work of the 4,000 people who make up our LEP community, whether it's a business, third sector FE, local authority leader, or one of our executive teams. It's well-deserved recognition and a significant endorsement of our resolve and contribution. And that resolve has helped us anchor LEPs in future policy for one reason, because right across the 12 missions and supporting pillars, we can clearly help government to deliver. And we are collaborating with government as we evolve our role to meet the challenges that lie ahead and generally level up across the country. And we're working with mayors and local leaders and are embracing the government's arrangements local leaders want and have been encouraged to adopt. So our next steps from here primarily are to ensure the role of local business remains a secure part of the future decision-making process in devolution structures, and that we are all clear on our role, whatever structure or model we're part of, and ensure we secure proper funding. To maintain the integrity and value of LEPs in future transition arrangements, we've also have unfinished business, but don't forget, we still have significant elements left from growth funds, which we must deliver and secure the outcomes we've committed. And if we can achieve all this, then I think the future we so deserve and the country could benefit from will be properly secured. And the task I set myself personally when I took over the LEP network in September 19 will be within our grasp. And then we can refocus our efforts on what really matters, helping local people and businesses realize their ambitions and play our part in levelling up the country. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you for a really impassioned case for the LEP network, which I'm sure will resonate with many on this call. And certainly I'm struck that one aspect of economic development policy or economic development activity that we faced over the years is how to correctly get that so important interface between business investment and economic policy. So certainly that was a rallying call to maintaining some of that. And at the time when we were looking at the LEP review as an institute, certainly thinking that if government is going to deliver on any of the policies that it was about to publish, that it really needed a vehicle to deliver that, and there was no point ripping up the networks and hard-won partnerships when actually there's a need to deliver now. So thank you very much. And now we're going to move on to our patron. So the Right Honourable Greg Clark, the patron of the Institute of Economic Development, Greg Clark MP, of course, but also somebody that's been very much at the heart of government in determining UK economic policy, somebody that's recognised regional issues, and of course somebody that's perhaps uniquely in recent times, as far as the Institute's concerned, been the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and also Housing, Communities and Local Government, probably the two most aligned departments of government to the IED. So yes, very warm welcome to Right Honourable Greg Clark, and we look forward to hearing your views on what's recently been published.
Nigel, thank you very much indeed. And it's a great honour to be patron of what I've always regarded as a very important organisation, comprising as it does the practitioners whose experience on the ground I think needs to have a loud voice in government. I always try to listen to it, and I'll play my part as patron in trying to amplify it in Westminster and Whitehall. And I just wanted to say thank you to Mark for his kind words. I completely agree that the LEP Network, I think, has achieved great things, and the number of reviews that you've had to put up with over recent years. You must be the most reviewed, essentially voluntary set of bodies in the country, and I hope this will be, you'll be allowed now to continue to grow rather than to be uprooted and inspected every so often. And I really admire what you're doing, and with my old friend Mark Livesey in the network, and all of the people that are giving their voluntary time and experience and energy to make a big difference to local communities. It's very much appreciated. I see on the participants list lots of old friends, lots of people that I enjoyed working with in the past. But for people that don't know me, just to amplify a bit on what Nigel said. So I feel very privileged as someone that's always came into politics because I was motivated by wanting to make sure that the whole country can realise its potential. That I've had two of the portfolios in communities, local government and in business that can help make a difference to that. And through that, there have been some consistent themes, the relevance of which will be obvious in a second. So when I was first appointed to government in 2010, it wasn't as Secretary of State, it was as Minister for Decentralisation, a job that David Cameron gave me that he didn't really know what it meant, but he had heard that I had taken an interest in this and thought that I should be given the chance to elaborate what it meant. And so in that time, I developed that role to be the Minister for Cities. We set up the LEPs, and we did the first city deals. First city deal was with Liverpool, followed by Manchester. The city deals became local growth deals. The local growth deals became Devo deals, often with elected mayors attached. We started in England, but we then rolled them out in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So that was from the DCLG point of view. During my 3 years as business secretary, I developed an industrial strategy for the country, which it surprised no one here to discover contained a fundamental reliance on local growth and the contribution to national prosperity that local places could make. It's always seemed obvious to me that if the country and governments of Westminster are in favour of growth, well, growth doesn't happen in the abstract. It happens in particular places when men and women create businesses, grow businesses, create opportunities there. It doesn't happen in the ether. Even virtual companies have to be somewhere located, and just as a country can be a good place or a place that puts obstacles in the way of the development of business and other opportunities, so local places can be, and we should be just as interested in what makes a difference locally as what makes a difference nationally, it seems to me. And the themes that we had, the pillars of the industrial strategy, were that we should pay great attention to local growth, but the other four were that we should invest more in science and innovation, particularly the transfer of ideas from the lab, as it were, to the workplace, skills, infrastructure, and to have a competitive business environment. And I mention all those things, not just as a kind of self-indulgence to go through my greatest hits, as it were, but because in reading the Levelling Up white paper, I detect a lot of continuity in policy over the last 10, 11, 12 years. And I was interested to see this because it wasn't necessarily going to be that way. This government has, I think, characterized itself as a very new broom. Many of the things that it's inherited, it has dropped, at least in name. And so I was concerned that we would have a kind of year zero approach that actually would fail to take account of some of the lessons, good and bad, that have been experienced during the last few years. And what Mark had to say about the LEP network and the work of the LEPs was a good case in point. I feared that there would be some new starts that would fail to capture and build on and indeed to continue the work that's being done. And that's not the case as far as I see it. Partly, I think, in reading the white paper and talking to Michael Gove and some of the people involved, it is interesting that fresh pairs of eyes contemplating questions of now how we level up, how we get the whole country to realize its potential, have come to some of the same conclusions that many people on this call have come to during their careers. And I'm pleased that that has been recognized and that there is a commitment, having thought about it, as Michael Gove always does in commissions that he's given, thought about it from first principles. Partly it's not so surprising, given that two of the people, just to name a couple who were very closely involved in this, apart from Michael, were Andy Haldane, whose work I drew on in the industrial strategy and has always been a great champion of our agenda, and Tom Walker, who, as the lead official in the department, was the first official that I had appointed to me when I was first appointed a Minister of Decentralisation. So Tom has been through the journey and all of the learnings that we've made. And so I'm pleased to see the degree of continuity that's there. So just a few things to say about it before we open up for questions to the panel. The first thing I would say is that even though many people know I'm not particularly of the tribe that is in the most significant parts of the government, it's very much a government formed of Brexiteers, and I was a prominent Remainer. So in looking at it, it's not with any particular dewy eyes that I bring to it, or rose-tinted glasses, but I do observe that both Boris Johnson and Michael Gove are very committed to this agenda. A big part of their analysis of the political project that is this government is based on the recognition that I've always had, and I know most people on this call have had, which is that we will never achieve our potential as a country if every part of the country is not delivering according to its potential. And for too long, we have been a country that has overlooked some of the contributions that can be made. And that fundamental political insight that is the foundation of the Levelling Up white paper, I think is deeply felt. And it's also, of course, very important politically, because a lot of the places to whom that prospectus has been pitched, if I can put it that way, are parts of the country that have returned Conservative MPs, sometimes for the first time, often called the Red Wall. They do, many of them share a sense that they've been, if not overlooked, then certainly have not achieved the potential that they have. And that is a very big motivating factor, not just in the people at the top of the government, but I would say in the new parliamentary party that contains over 100 new Conservative MPs. And in this respect, I think the commitment to this agenda is more than was the case during the early years of the David Cameron government. I felt that we had to persuade David Cameron through George Osborne ultimately, but also George, of this, the importance of this agenda. And it was never as central as I think it is to the current government. So I think the foundations are that this is not just a kind of warm words commitment. They are very interested in outcomes, hence some of the metrics that this paper includes. The second thing I think is striking about it is the continued respect for and recognition of what we used to call functional economic geography. Going back to the early days of this agenda, we had a misstep, which many of you will remember, when we had referenda very early on creating mayors in what were principally city centre authorities, reflecting the administrative structure of the country. They, with the exception of Bristol, didn't succeed in creating mayors, but we continued with the thought that a direct mandate could be important. And I think from that, through the combined authorities, there was a recognition that dawned on government that actually the right unit for organisation was something that was reflective of the functional economic geography, not necessarily inherited administrative boundaries. And I think that continues to this day, and it's something that this institute has always recognised. What I think the Levelling Up White Paper connotes in this respect is a recognition that in terms of the city centres, we've come a long way in 12 years. There is a real sense, it's obviously not perfect and it's not uniform, but there's a real sense that our great cities, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Newcastle, and the rest, they have a sense of restored energy and possibility, and we kind of know what needs to be done there and have made many of the steps in that direction. And I think that is a symptom of success, and a lot of the white paper is continuing that. But that has meant the progress on cities has meant, as is evident, that the focus on towns is increasingly important. And again, I think this represents a real escalation of interest in towns by this government. I had a huge row in 2017 when we were publishing the industrial strategy white paper, in which in the place section, I wanted to make a commitment that we should do town deals, recognizing that there were particular opportunities that were available in a bespoke way in different towns. It got to the night that the white paper was going to press, a Saturday night, in fact, and there was a standoff. I couldn't get Treasury sign-off unless I removed every reference to town deals. The thought being that this was a kind of foot in the door, and if we talked about town deals, everyone would want to have one, and it was a whole new wave that the Treasury were reluctant to even start, and that's often the Treasury way, to not allow feet to be put in the door. But I have to admit, now I'm at a safe distance to do so. I'm afraid I was rather subversive, and in the last stage of the proofs, when it was too late, I inserted a reference to a commitment to doing a town deal with Grimsby, which then did make it into the press. And obviously, once you've committed to something, you have to do it. And so we did negotiate a town deal with Grimsby, and just as I expected and hoped for, people spotted that this might have some wider application. This has now been taken up with some enthusiasm by this government. The other thing that I would mention in terms of the paper is, when it comes to what you do, what are the drivers for local success? There is something of a departure, I would say, of the emphasis on infrastructure, which very much characterized, if I can call it this, the Cameron years. Much of the theory of local economic growth came from Jim O'Neill, Lord O'Neill's writing, and obviously from international urbanist writers talking about the agglomeration effect. It's still important, and infrastructure does have an important place. But I detect on the part of people in the government the thought that infrastructure and agglomeration is not enough. That if you connect, for example, Grimsby better to the cities of West Yorkshire, that is not sufficient to turn it into a prosperous town, just as is evidently the case that there are parts of London that, for all their good connections to places of prosperity within the capital, still have problems that need to be addressed. And so I think the emphasis on skills in particular in the Levelling Up white paper is striking. And beyond what's written down in the white paper, from my conversations with ministers and others, I think skills is going to be a very important component of the work over the next few years. And this institute and the LEP network will have an important role to play in that. The fourth thing that I would, observation I would make about the paper is the continuing commitment to a deal-based approach. When we did the first city deal with Liverpool, this was a new concept. It was an analogy. We do deals in business and in our personal affairs, but we coined the phrase in the policy context to reflect the fact that in the case of Liverpool and thereafter Manchester, there was something in the national interest, in the Treasury's interest in a successful Liverpool and Manchester, and of course in the country's interest, and there was something in the local interest, and we should be able to find common ground between them. They should be negotiated, and we should find, as any deal does, find common ground. So it was a new policy word, it was a new expression, but now I think it's firmly established, and it does have important implications. If it's a deal, there has to be something in it for both sides. It's not simply an imposition of policy from the centre locally. By implication, it's not going to be uniform. It's different places will have different priorities, different needs, different agendas. And so it means not a uniform pattern of devolution, but a more variegated one. It also reflects, as the early city deals did, the idea that the capacity and, to be frank, the appetite for devolution differs from place to place, and that the ones with the greatest capacity and the greatest appetite should not be held back by those that are either more reluctant or don't have that capacity. And I'm interested to see that approach continues. And again, I think the work of the Institute and indeed the LEP network in making sure that the bottom-up drive characterizes what is achieved is very important. If I were just to briefly mention a few kind of weaknesses or aspects of unfinished business about the white paper before we open up for discussion. The first thing I would say, and this is, I think, certainly a controversial point, but there is no significant central effort for local government or reorganization in this. Now, this, as everyone in this call knows, is something that is from Redcliffe Maud onward. What should our authorities be has long exercised people. Eric Pickles, my first Secretary of State, said that he would shoot the first person that mentioned local government reorganisation, and so that was dead in the water. When I was Secretary of State, just for a year, with a majority of 14, that wasn't possible to take through Parliament. Boris Johnson could have used some political capital and some of his 80+ majority if he wanted to have a big, either forced or strongly incentivized move to unitary authorities. But he hasn't done so. I became convinced that a unitary model was the most effective model of local government organization. Of course, combined authorities can and do involve unitary authorities. But that's clearly not going to happen, and I suspect that the political headwinds that Boris Johnson has found himself in over parties and such like, I think mean that is unlikely now, and so I think we have the mild incentives that are there. My observation is that I haven't met people familiar with a unitary an authority that became a unitary authority that after a couple of years wants to go back to the status quo ante. I think I'm happy to be corrected, but my experience is that most people that have gone to unitary don't want to reverse it. The second slight note of caution and concern I have is about the role of LEPs. As Mark said, I think to have survived what could have been a kind of hacking back of the role of LEPs, I think is very significant and reflects the advocacy and frankly the experience and the achievements of people in the network. But I don't think there is a very that is white paper role of LEPs. And in particular, I feel that some momentum in the last couple of years on the local industrial strategies, being prepared and in them, but I don't think they have the degree of national political prominence that they ought to have. And so I hope that the Institute, the LEP Network, and those of you that agree with this analysis will really get behind making the case for the local industrial strategies to be regarded as very serious and important. And the final point that I would make, and I know it's something that is shared by many people in the sectors that we comprise, which is that there is not a great deal of extra money that is being put behind the white paper. Money isn't everything, but it helps. And the continued resistance to tax raising powers mean that there are some limits on the amount of transformation that can be achieved, whether it's through skills or whether it's through infrastructure or other aspects. And I think that is unfinished business as to how, if we really want to level up and make a big difference, how we can do it with resources that are still pretty limited. So that is my take on it. Having done the jobs for about 9 years, I take a close and active interest in it. I think it's I think it's good that the paper is there. I think it's very good that Michael Gove is the Secretary of State. He's serious, he's thoughtful, he's rigorous, and he's capable. And he's someone that likes to deliver. He's not just someone that would content with having published the piece of work. I'm very pleased that Andy Haldane, who I appointed to chair the Industrial Strategy Council, has been invited back to both work on the paper and to look at its implementation. I am very keen that there is momentum now on implementing the policies that are there. But what I would say to you all and to the Institute is that whilst the white paper is both a kind of relief and a kind of point of energy for this agenda, it can't be taken for granted. I think there is a fight still to make sure that the progress that we've made and you've made over recent years not only continues, but accelerates during the next few months and years ahead. Thank you very much for inviting me. I look forward to questions.
Greg, thank you very much. And I'm struck by some of the things you said, growth happening at a granular level, policy to national areas needing to achieve their potential from a skills perspective, maybe helping people have greater equality of opportunity and that need for common ground. But I think for the Institute, thinking about shared prosperity fund and thinking of the importance of all that analysis that went into local industrial strategies and how that's brought forward. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Bev, who is going to chair the Q&A session. So Bev Hurley, who's many of you will know, is the chair of the Institute of Economic Development in her second term and has driven forward the IED over the last 5 years. So and just very briefly before handing over to Bev, just thank Mairi, Mark and Greg for the thoughtful contributions that kick us off. So Bev.
Thank you, Nigel. And yes, a great thank you to our speakers. You've already provoked quite a few comments in the questions and answers. I'm delighted this is our first big event with the LEP Network, and hope that many more will follow in this spirit of collaboration and people working across boundaries and regions and so on. So that's great. Greg, as always, a pleasure to hear your perspective on things. I'm so delighted we have a subversive chair, and I might take my chair's privilege and come back to you and the other panel members for a very quick question right at the end. But just picking out some of the questions that have come in so far, starting with this one to you, Greg, which speaks to this thing in the white paper that the first part of it is all about hyperlocality and the differences within regions greater than out with regions. But the focus in section 3 is very much regionally based. So what are your thoughts about pockets of deprivation that we often have still in London and the southeast and southwest? You know, how do they approach this? That's a sort of key tension, I think.
I think that's right, Bev. And as I say, I think there is a big shift towards the hyperlocal, and it's a reflection of the Towns point that I made earlier. There is a great interest in the hyperlocal. Partly, I think this is a reflection of the success of this agenda in terms of it having been persuasive over the last 10 and perhaps some more years. I mean, the question, if you consider back in 2010, when we had no combined authorities, we had only a single, I think, directly elected city mayor. We had some borough mayors, and that was London. We had the regional development agencies, but they were at a regional level rather than at what we thought were the more local levels. There's been a lot of progress in thinking that I think has been made there, and I think a lot of that has now been banked, and I think it's now accepted that a lot of these things have to be done at a less than national level, lower than at national level. And so the next phase is to kind of narrow your kind of focus a bit more and to see within regions, within areas, to apply the same analysis. So I think that that reflects at that. I think one of the big challenges is, and it's important, especially, I'm a Kent MP. I've got colleagues on the call from Kent. Kent is by no means a uniformly prosperous place. There are places in Kent that require levelling up just as much as places in the North and the Midlands. And so I think the execution of this white paper and the strategy that it contains must reflect this hyperlocal approach, North and South. Otherwise, I think there's a danger that it will be seen as missing an important dimension. And I'm not sure that has been sufficiently well communicated in, for example, the south of England, and it applies to other areas as well.
Thank you. It's so far away from being a simple north-south divide, isn't it? As we all know. Mark, I think you very much welcome this focus on functional economic geographies, but in your network, just like Greg, you've got chairs and chief execs managing very, very disparate inequalities within the LEP region. How do you see this hyperlocal focus playing out? And what can the LEP network do to ensure that the very deprived and left behind areas within LEPs actually have a voice and an impact?
Yeah, so I think right from the start, when we started talking about levelling up more than a year ago, as a network collective, we've always made the point that it's not a north-south divide, but it is a holistic issue for the country. We've got people talk about towns, they talk about other sorts of bits of the country. They don't talk about rural enough, and there's some real challenges here. The most deprived area in the UK is Jaywick Sands, which is in Essex. So it is a challenge here. I think what we've been trying to do with all of this is to make sure that what we don't end up with is levelling up in some parts of the country at the expense of levelling down something else. And as business people, we have to continually make the balance case that says levelling up will need to be collectively funded. It's business that helps create the jobs that makes this happen. There are strong and wealthy parts across the country who will make that bigger contribution to the exchequer to allow some of these things to happen. But we don't want to leave our colleagues behind. And so this kind of cross-working between LEPs in looking at sectors and just keeping that message going is a very consistent thing for us. Yes,
for sure. And actually it speaks to one of the first questions we had, which just touches on what Marie was saying about the funding, how much there is, what the capacity or the variability in capacity of institutions in these functional economic geographies to be able to bid in, to do deals that Greg talked about. And one of our participants said, and what about the governance? In these different sorts of areas that we want to get around the table, will they be empowered through their governance to deliver the levelling up agenda? If I start that one with Marie, because you talked about this variability and capacity to engage in the funding part of this agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a common thing we've heard from local government bodies that we've spoken to through the current funding rounds that have happened. And also that it's to some extent bypassed, regional strategic priorities that have been built up over a number of years through regional city and growth deals. Not to mention looking to spend in potentially devolved areas that they are actually functionally devolved to the governments who are responsible for those parts of the country. And I do think that that's a big issue. We have seen significant cuts to local government funding in across the UK, and in some areas that has meant that the investment and support for economic development functions has been eroded. And some of that might be because they're relying more on the LEPs in England. Perhaps there's the economic development agencies in Scotland and Wales as well, and Northern Ireland. But we have seen that erosion in some local authorities of that economic development capacity. And so many of them, whilst they didn't want to miss the boat on levelling up or the community renewal fund, were really struggling to put a bid together, that was credible, to put a bid together which meant they could spend that money by then and this other money by this other time, which was, you know, these sorts of arbitrary limits of when the money had to be spent. And there was a real struggle. And I do not think it's an efficient way or a strategic way to level up the country. The other thing as well is about the sort of going back to the hyper-local point, is at what point you're looking at areas that need to be leveled up, and whether you're talking about households. A lot of this the focus is on area-based indicators of need. But if you're thinking about, you know, children from deprived areas, children who are entitled to free school meals, households that are in poverty, it's really about the household level. So, you know, local-based investments in infrastructure and perhaps cultural heritage are not the only way that, if the government wished to level up the country, there are also targeted measures they could use for households, which just don't seem to be having a discussion here at all.
Very good point. Come back to you on that one, Greg.
Sure. One of the good things about the deals, and it reflects the LEPs, is that bringing people together around the same table has been, I think, an enormous move forward. And I mean, if I take when we first started doing the city deals in Scotland, starting with Glasgow, it was quite difficult at first to get, you know, bodies, local authorities, and the government in Scotland around the same table. But actually, this reflection that there is something in everyone's interest, when it worked, when it happened, those standing relationships were really important over and above the particular decisions that were made. And I know that the LEPs, every LEP in the country, I think there's a much better understanding of the civic and the business community, and indeed other sectors of voluntary and universities, for example. Having everyone around the table, that's an important part of it, whatever the level of resources. I would be, in terms of this question of capacity, I would be challenging back to local areas and local authorities in particular. I think it would be wrong for everyone to be held back by the lack of capacity of certain areas. And in some respects, the lack of capacity, I think, if not self-imposed, could be corrected. The creation of combined authorities, I think, was very important. Actually, the early misfiring of the mayors when they were city centre authority mayors may have been a blessing in disguise, because actually having combined authorities created for the first time that brought together a number, first of all, of metropolitan authorities together, really increased the capacity for economic development, I would say, more than the sum of the local authorities. The creation of these combined authorities was, as some people on this call will remember, was quite painful. It does involve the kind of pooling of sovereignty, and it wasn't easy, but I think it was worth it. And for those places outside combined authorities, and if I think of Kent, for example, I think of West Kent. We have in West Kent, Sevenoaks District Council, Tunbridge and Malling District Council, Tunbridge Wells District Council. We have an excellent economic development officer in Tunbridge Wells, Hilary Smith. But I think that if we had a single West Kent authority, the capacity to really make a difference in economic development, I think, would be greater. And I think there's a bit too much of a fatalism on the part of some authorities. Say, well, this is the structure we have. We don't have the capacity. Actually, you can do something about the capacity. You can combine, and you can, I think, make a bigger impact in so doing.
I'm reading that to say combine or fail, almost.
Well, I wouldn't say it's that uniform, but I think if you combine, I think you if it's done well, you can have mergers and you can have combinations that don't succeed. But I think you really can, and all of the combined authorities that have succeeded with growth deals and city deals and Devo deals, I think couldn't have done it if you were split. I think of the Tees Valley, for example, that's doing very well. I find it very hard to think that it would be doing so well with the 5 or whatever it is constituent authorities if they were all separate. They weren't part of the Tees Valley Combined Authority.
So offsetting the pretty draconian cuts to local authority budgets by a renewed focus on, in business terms, joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, partnerships, whatever, which comes back to an earlier point to go back to Mark, and you can pick this one up at the same time, Mark, is it looks like now the original concept behind what the LEPs were to do, which was this convening partnership role, has now been pretty firmly established and thank goodness not thrown away in the favour of something else. How do you see the LEPs playing out in addressing this capacity issue at local level?
Yeah, and I was going to pick up on a couple of things that just reinforce what Greg has said. I think part of the frustration of the last couple of years, but also the kind of jubilation that we've got somewhere to go now, is that we've got, already enshrined and well practiced, across the country, in England at least, the capacity to, if we need to bid, we need to bid. If we need to put decent business cases together, we can do that. But what we can also do is deliver and measure the outcomes from it, because that's the entire business cycle. And if you take a look at the amount of public money we've been entrusted with over the last 10 years, and then please don't send me the examples I don't know anything about, but how many of those programs, and there are many, many programs that sit under sort of LEP governance, have gone on to the government naughty step? Very, very few. And so there's something here about rigor, and there's something here about good process and good governance, but there's something here about using something which is well tried and trusted. And that capacity is there. And I saw that in the Communities Renewal Fund, where I saw a hodgepodge of different approaches to how things would be. And a lot of local authorities use their LEP colleagues. We did that in my part of the world to bid. Other people made their best efforts from scratch, didn't use their LEP colleagues. Other people went out and, I came from this industry, they paid expensive consultants who did the bid and left. Let's take a step back here. We have now very well honed institutions that can do this very well, and I think that capacity is there. But again, coming back to one of the comments I made in my I think the passionate speech, I think was the phrase given, we need the money. I'm not so worried now. We've got to make this adjustment around capital, although we still have some left to deliver. We need the revenue funding, the capacity funding, in order to keep this going. There's a great capability here we do not want to waste.
Thank you. What do you think is the danger of this all moving in towards delegation rather than, or possibly as well as having 2 and 3 tier systems and structures? Is that a strength that, say, the mayoral combined authorities are at the top of the tree? How is that going to play out across the country? And is it going to get in the way of impeding progress around levelling up if people need to reorganise and combine or merge or partner with people? Is that just going to be another challenge before they can even get started on this agenda? Let's go to Greg for that one to kick off, and then perhaps across all the panel. I'm sure you've got views on that.
Thanks, Bev. I mean, listen, any kind of reorganisation has its costs, has its downside. But if I look back at what was done in terms of creating the combined authorities, which, as you know, require constitutions to be drawn up, require resolutions in every constituent council, the creation of the directly elected mayors, they all entailed quite a bit of disruption, if you can call it that. But I think it was worth doing, and I think it is worth walking through that to get to a better model. The danger of, if I can think about it as kind of the delegated approach. And I think this is the principal threat to this agenda, given that there isn't local revenue raising powers, and given that the sums of money are not vast. The great danger, I think, is a political danger, that those sums of money that central government puts into this agenda to be devolved for decision making locally, whether by mayors or by combined authorities. People don't understand the process, and if the government feels that it's in a tight fiscal time has found money for this, and then it's deployed politically in ways that actually don't reflect that this is a deal, this is a good collaboration between the government and the locality, but it's almost kind of used against the government. So you see what we're doing in this place. We can do it very well, but central government doesn't do it. I can tell you, I can report from when I was in government, if you've basically kind of lifted and shifted some of the Whitehall budget to a locality, and then the communication is this was all down to the locality and has nothing to do with a decision made by central government, that is resented and is in absent local tax raising powers, there's big political pressure, especially from those who are not particularly signed up to this agenda. So to hell with that. If we are going to make an investment in a particular area, we'll do it from central government, we'll get the credit for it, we will have that reflected. So I do think, and I say this to mayors of every political colour and combined authorities, be careful to respect the kind of spirit of these being deals between the two, and don't be too curmudgeonly about the role of central government in this, because the danger, if you are, is that they'll say, well, we have other ways of distributing money.
Might walk away from the negotiating table.
Yeah.
Marie and Mark. Marie, let's bring you back into this discussion. How is that tension between delegation, control, true partnership? How is that playing out in the people that you speak with?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, in the devolved nations, this is very complex. That we've got, the UK government keen to interact with local authorities, because that's the only other, functional level that they can engage with in order to distribute these funds. Now, there was obviously the structure that has been built through city and region deals, which has been collections of local authorities, which I think has been really positive for a strategic regional investment. And it may have been that would have been a better structure, although it isn't formalised in the same way as local government is in Scotland. So I guess the UK government felt it had to go direct to local government. But it is spending in devolved areas that are responsible at the Scottish government. And, it feels like it's a political decision rather than, maybe the best way to do it. But as Greg has said, the UK government, fair enough, want to get the credit for spending in these areas. So it feels like we're in this situation because of politics, rather than it being necessarily the best way to strategically spend money, as part of this agenda. But it's really quite difficult to see how else it's going to play out, particularly given the sort of intergovernmental relationship between the Scottish and the UK government at the moment, and maybe similarly in Wales as well.
An even bigger complex problem. And actually, Mark, you have an interesting perspective on this, because it was through your advocacy and proving the value that the LEP network had brought to the economy, and taking the credit, quite rightly, for your 20 billion and the co-investment and all the things that's leveraged. You would want to take some credit too. So there's a lot of tensions here between central, local, regional, and hyperlocal. How does that appear to you?
Well, I'm just going to remind everybody we are apolitical, but you can't operate in a political environment without having some perspective. So let me give you a little of mine, and some of it's personal. I would say a few things. I think there is, and it came up in one of the questions actually, there is an interesting tension between political boundary structures and functional and economic areas. And we've learnt to live with those. We still have some overlaps that are left in some of the LEPs. I think neither neither party would start from where we are. I mean, I could be heretic and say, why don't you reorganize politics around functional economic areas? But that might be one of my last months in the LEP Network chair, I don't know. But that's an interesting thought. I would say, we could spend an awful lot of time contemplating our internal naval while we are busy sorting a few things out. And I can't say that no commercial organization has gone, I've got a bit of a problem, so let's reorganize and get a load of people in to do that. But I would just give this message: if you're going to do it, could you please get on with it? If you're not going to do it, then let's get on with something else. But let's not dither whilst all this happens, because that is, I think, causing part of the uncertainty here. And that is not helpful. And one of the things that business needs to invest, and it's been made quite clear that business will create the jobs that the levelling up policies will help to enable. We need some certainty against the economic background that does that. And fiddling around with the structure while we do that, and then forcing us to go through yet more chops and changes and moving things around is not conducive to that. So if we're going to do the deed, let's do the deed and get on with it. And if not, let's do something else.
I can agree with you more as a businesswoman. Excuse me. And that speaks to one of the last two questions I hope we're going to get time to address. One of our participants has said 2030 horizon, that's too far in the future for many businesses. I mean, from my perspective, it's nowhere near far enough in the future to address the longer term structural inequalities we have, but 2030 it is. For a lot of small businesses, that's way too far. They're focused on the here and now, the recovery, the challenges, all the rising costs. So the question is, how, as economic leads, can we help even small and micro businesses, which form a vast part of our SME population in particular? How can we get them to participate in these critical discussions? Would you like, as you have the floor, Mark, a few thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a great business model story that gets used around the Apollo 13 experience, where you've got one group of people who are looking at the long-term view of making sure that the spacecraft can land, and the other bit that says that actually are the astronauts still going to be alive when it gets there. And there is some resonance here for that. I think we absolutely must do, and you've made the point quite powerfully yourself, Ash, we must do this long-term work, because otherwise we're not going to fix some of these structural inefficiencies. But at the same time, we do have to bring businesses and people along with us. We have a role to play. That's what growth hubs do. That's some of the support that we provide. We saw that 100 interventions during COVID to help support businesses. So I think there is a bit of a, there's a dual plan here. Some very short-term things need to keep going, but we mustn't allow that, or to be honest, the political cycle to stop us doing the long-term things which the country needs.
And possibly COVID has a set of kind of context. We are all in these things together. If one area or one part of the system and the infrastructure fails, then we all fall down on that. And possibly businesses, small businesses in particular, could be persuaded to engage in this social, educational, health. It's a wider agenda that us as citizens should be playing a part in. But the business representatives perhaps can come around your convening table. Greg, do you want to add any thoughts on that, or shall I get on to the last question, which is one very close to my heart?
Yes, just briefly, Bev, on this, which is to say that something that most people on this call know, that local economic development is personal. It's not just about setting the right policies and the right structures. Where it works, it's because people on the ground talk to people, understand their needs, and are able to accommodate them, find the right space for them in the area, put them in touch with people who will help them grow to the next stage. You need to know them. Now, central government can't do that for every small business in the country. It might be able to do it for some of the bigger ones. It's important to have relationships there, but it can't do it for small businesses. Whereas LEPs and local institutions can. And it's one of the, in a world in which a lot of innovation and growth is going to come from small businesses, the case for local economic development, I think, is made especially through this. And it is, as people know, rolling up their sleeves. I remember, I think my predecessor as patron of the Institute, Howard Bernstein, my experience when I was a minister was if there was an investor that he heard was in town in London, he would get wind of it and he'd be straight down on the next train from Manchester, trying to kind of lure them to see some new site that he had in Salford or something that could attract them. It was intensely personal, and Greater Manchester, the City of Manchester, prospered in no significant degree because of that personal touch. And so I think it's important to emphasize that to policymakers in Whitehall and to ministers, that the personal is vital and only us, could do the personal.
Yes, absolutely right. It is all about us as individuals in the end game, and your comments and that little discussion leads us nicely onto this comment, which says one of the key problems that local authorities in particular are trying to address is how to identify key social outcomes, social value, community benefits, and align them to economic outcomes, which are all obviously implicit in the white paper. But this is a bit of a conundrum for local authorities with a lack of new resources, because this alignment between economic, social and environmental policies are critical to growth, not just economic growth. So the plea about finite resources and sort of infinite demands placed on all of those activities, which are all vital, the social and the economic and the environmental, is the challenge. How can we stop people just getting stretched beyond measure and failing to deliver any of those three things? So given your firm words earlier on, Greg, I'm going to ask you to comment on that part. What is the government going to do to enable this alignment between social, environmental and economic through the levelling up agenda?
Starting from the bottom up, it's obvious that you need all three if there is to be success locally. The idea that people are going to want to live and work in a place that is a hellhole is for the birds. People want to, and given the choice that people have in a time of relatively low unemployment and the labour constraints that we have, if people are going to live in a place, they want it to be an attractive place, and that increasingly involves access to green space and to a healthy outdoors, and I would say culturally as well. Not many people want to live in a place where there are no cultural attractions. And so if I think of the revival of the standing of some of our great cities in recent years, it's because they've combined an economic revival with often an environmental and a cultural revival. And so that recipe, it seems to me, there is no alternative to it. It's important that government should recognize it. In the industrial strategy, we had, some people on this call will have benefited from the Creative Clusters program that's done great work. Peter Bazalgette proposed it, and it's been very successful. So I hope that will be part of national policy. The opportunity of a white paper that is quite wide-ranging is that it can integrate different approaches. That's one of the senses of a strategy. A strategy can be for the long term, but it also has a sense of being integrative of other initiatives. So I hope it will be, and I hope locally, well, I know locally, people understand that in spades. People want their area to be successful, and that includes social and environmental as well as economic.
Thank you. I'm really conscious I have a minute. I would like to just ask a pointed question, not subversive. 12 missions, all the supporting pillars. If I could ask each of you to just say top three for you personally, if we decided that we would focus whatever resources we had on the things that we think would make the biggest difference to the unlevel economy, what would they be? Marie, let's come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think focusing on the longer term objectives that and you know will ultimately mean that our you know the health of our population, the skills of our population, is what we need it to be in order to you know ensure that we can have a prosperous and successful country. For investing in those longer term outcomes, which we know evidence suggests will drive prosperity in the future, is really what I would like to see, that focus on these much longer term goals. Yeah.
Health, skills, long term. Great. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are key for me. Let me wrap them up in a slightly different way then, because I think there's a role for business here which is getting amplified. I mean, I think what we need to do in business is to create hope for people, so that they believe that they are going to come out, get up in the morning, having looked after themselves and kept themselves fit and out of the health service, that they believe they've got great opportunities to go and realise their ambitions in work, and so that they are out of the crime system as well. And I see that, you know, my daughter works in a very deprived school, my wife is a magistrate. So we really want to make sure that people are well skilled, well incentivised, but business is here to give hope. And if the levelling up paper should do anything, it should be encouraging people to have some hope that they're going to fix some of the long-standing issues holistically, not just north, south, east and west, but holistically.
Great, I agree with that. So the last word with you, Greg, health, skills, hope and ambition. What would you add?
Education. I think the biggest single difference we could make to levelling up, to achieving our potential, is literally for children to be able to achieve their potential. And some of you know I chair the Science and Technology Committee in Parliament. So many kids lose out on the ability to have fulfilling careers that are good for them and good for everyone in science and technology, because they don't get the right education early enough in their lives, and so can't access the either the further education or higher education, or sometimes even the apprenticeships. You need a certain grounding, especially in obviously maths and English. And we are far too variable in that. We should, I think if there's one thing, in the desert island discs of the pledges, if they were all swept away, then I think the education one is the one that should remain.
Thank you very much. So apologies for running 3 minutes late to those people who posed questions that we didn't get to answer. To our speakers, very lively, a very, very interesting debate. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us. And unless Nigel has anything else to add, I am very pleased to wrap up this session with my thanks to you all. Have a good day. Bye-bye.